Hello and welcome to today's live stream. My name is Angus. Happy Friday to the Stryd community. And today we are talking about improving your run form with Stryd Footpath. This is a very exciting release. This is something we've been working on for a long time. And I am joined by the author of the article, Ko Cruz. Ko, can you please introduce yourself?
Hey guys, yeah. My name's Kael. I'm the human performance specialist here at Stryd. And then I edited a lot of the article, but also with input from a lot of professionals that we work with as well. So they can't be here today, but I'll be your representative.
So improving your run form with Stryd Footpath. So Stryd Footpath is something we introduced as part of the Stryd Duo launch in 2023. Giving you that millimeter precision on how your foot is moving in 3D space. This is accessible whether you have the next gen Stryd or the Stryd Duo, and if you have the Stryd membership, giving you those high quality, in-depth 3D visualizations. And this article is basically going to help you understand what you're looking at with Stryd Footpath, understand the different components of the Stryd Footpath, how it relates to the motion of the runner, and then giving you ideas on what are more advantageous and successful characteristics to look for in part of your Stryd Footpath, and ultimately how to improve that. So we're going to be looking at 3 different topics today: where to find these new educational materials. Part 2 is analyzing the Stryd Footpath, whether we should look at the single run view or monthly view, determining what characteristics you should focus on to improve your Stryd Footpath, to improve your running form. And then finally, number 3, scheduling interventions, running cues you can be thinking of, how to continually analyze your data to see if you're making improvements and those improvements are sticking and kind of building on top of each other over time. So step number 1 here is accessing the new articles. So we've opened up the Stryd Learning Center at learn.stryd.com. So if you type this into your web browser, whether you're on your computer or on the phone, head over to learn.stryd.com, and that is going to open up the Stryd Learning Center. So we have 2 articles here right now. And Ko, could you give us a breakdown of these 2 articles we can find in the Stryd Learning Center?
Yeah, so basically one of these articles is going to be focusing on your classic mechanical metrics. That's going to be ground contact time, vertical oscillation, leg spring stiffness, and impact loading rate. And it just goes into one, understanding what those metrics are, and then practical ways to improve those metrics through drills, mobility, movement, motion. And then basically the Stryd Footpath article that we're going over today is kind of like the companion to that, in that it focuses on specifically the footpath, how to identify the footpath, understand it, and then similarly like practical ways to improve it. And again, we'll touch on this probably later in the presentation, but the metrics and the footpath are synergistic. They're not necessarily two like isolated different things. They work together in compliance with one another.
So I'm going to jump into that article here. So we can tap on this improve your running form with Stryd Footpath to find this new article we're going to be talking about today. And that's going to open up this Wikipedia style page, giving us our table of contents that's going to allow us to dive into these topics such as what is Stryd Footpath, understanding the components of Stryd Footpath, the characteristics of a successful Stryd Footpath, and then taking the next steps on how to achieve your goals, and then what this looks like as part of a real world case study here. So I want to go through a quick walk through this article, just kind of step by step, breaking down these components to kind of the next level. So what we open to first here is what is the Stryd Footpath? And Ko, could you just give us a cursory overview of what we're seeing here when we're looking at this this diagram?
Yeah, so basically this section just explains how Stryd settled on a closed loop visualization, which is basically like that comet shape that you're seeing right there. But it's basically breaking it down into backside and front side mechanics, as you can see by that vertical line, and then horizontal division, so like that stance mechanics, so the green and red there, as well as the flight phase, which is going to be that white above it. And just dividing into different parts, which we go into later in the article.
So in case this visualization is not immediately recognizable to the Stryd user, this is the same data that the Stryd FootPod reports, and this is an example of the Stryd footpath visualization if you're using Stryd Duo, where you can see both the left and right foot. And this is viewed from the side view here. So if you do have this data already, of course, you can access this on your Stryd account by opening it up at stryd.com/power center, tapping on footpath tools, and then either looking at the monthly or run activity view and putting it in the side view here. And you can see how this footpath view here on my Stryd account is directly analogous to this comet-shaped, as Ko described, footpath breakdown here. So then the second part of the article here is understanding the Stryd footpath components here. And Ko, I see we have two different images covering backside and front side on the left, and then kind of this flight phase, stance phase. Can you describe what we're looking at here?
Yeah, it's kind of what I alluded to in the section before this, but it's basically two ways to look at your footpath. With front side being, more movements in front of your center of mass, determining braking forces and trajectory, and then backside being more movements behind your center of mass, and that's going to be more propulsion and efficiency in terms of that. And then horizontal division is looking at stance phase, so the time that you're on the ground, which is important for impact absorption and generating force, and then recovery phase, which is that flight phase white line above, which is when your foot's not contacting the ground, and that's going to be more repositioning for the next stride and making sure you're getting effective ground strike.
So I think by this time the Stryd audience is getting a pretty good idea of what we're looking at. One additional thing, in case you don't have that context on what we're looking at, you can always turn on the reference image on the Stryd Power Center, and this can also kind of help contextualize what you're looking at in terms of that back kick and that follow through, and then landing on the ground here, and that's what we're going to move into as the first part of this article. And what is going on in this first part of the article here, where it's breaking down each component of the footpath, and then what are we learning at here when we look at the what is it and why it matters sections of this article?
Yeah, so basically the horizontal and vertical divisions to kind of give you a general view of what you're looking at when you look at your footpath. And then at this part, we're breaking down specific key parts of the footpath. What it is just telling you exactly what's happening at that point. For example, foot strike is the moment that your foot contacts the ground. And then why it matters is, effectively, why does it matter that we care about this point? Why is it more salient than any other point that we could make on this footpath tracing? For foot strike, for example, it determines your foot strike pattern. Are you heel striking? Are you midfoot, forefoot? Are you overstriding, understriding? And this is just all context for effective force generation, and which plays into a lot of other parts of the footpath as well.
So moving on here, I see we go from foot strike basically to toe off. And then we start moving into components like the follow through, heel recovery. And basically it looks like we're looping through from start to finish here, from basically the moment the foot strikes the ground to the moment the foot lifts off, swings through, and then contacts the ground again.
Yep, exactly. We're just again walking you through like the key parts of the footpath from the start of a stride cycle to the end of a stride cycle. And then this kind of bleeds into the next part of the article where we're talking about basically characteristics of a footpath that tends to be more successful in terms of efficiency, performance, injury, resilience, and basically having that context of, oh, what does foot strike mean? Can help play into your understanding of what makes these successful characteristics.
So just doing a quick jump through to my footpath here. I now have a pretty good sense here. I can kind of identify, okay, in this general section here where my cursor is, I can see this is probably right around where the foot strike is. I get a pretty good sense of the propulsion and braking, the backswing, the follow through, the knee lift, and then swing to contact the ground again here. So just by jumping across these two different tabs, I do get a pretty good sense of what I'm looking at and how these kind of standardized diagrams relate to my personal footpath here. So as Ko said, now I can kind of take the next step here and understand if I wanted to improve my running form, improve my Stryd footpath, what kind of characteristics moving in, what kind of characteristics correlate with that here. So I see this this first point here, near center of mass ground contact time. And can you describe why this is more beneficial versus kind of this further center of mass ground contact?
Yeah, so this kind of goes with the idea of overstriding, kind of like what I talked about in terms of foot strike determination. But basically, when you're striking the ground closer to your center of mass, it's more efficient. You're striking the ground more effectively, so you're better able to basically take the impact, absorb it, and release it more of that energy back into your stride. And that's reflected in the shorter stance phase. So shorter stance phase, similar to a shorter ground contact time, means that you're more efficient because you're spending less time on the ground and more time in the air. And this is just an example of visually seeing that like ground contact improvement in your footpath. Because kind of like I alluded to, the footpath and the metrics, they're synergistic, they influence one another. So maybe when you're looking at your metrics, ground contact time is like very salient to you and you're starting to work on the ground contact time using the other article, you'll probably see that you might also get a shorter stance time in your footpath as well, and then also vice versa. So it's just two different ways of basically tackling the same issue. Footpath just gives you basically exactly what you're doing in the moment, your foot in 3D space. And a metric is just one pinpoint of that.
Awesome. So I know we are going to cover some examples in depth, so I won't cover each of these, but now I do have a pretty good sense idea of how I'm going to use this article where understanding to then understanding, what my footpath looks like and understanding more successful characteristics here. So today's process we want to talk to is I want to go into this just one level deeper here. So first, understanding the Stryd footpath, second, analyzing the footpath, and three, implementing changes here. So I just want to call attention back to this first point here is the first step in this is first reading the article and then understanding how these components of your footpath relate to your own personal data. So following the similar process I just did where I'm kind of tabbing back and forth between my Power Center account, my personal data, and the article, and then going in and looking at, okay, now how can I improve this? Understanding what a more successful characteristic would look like. And once we've gone through that process, the second step is to analyze here. So Ko, when I jump over to my Power Center, I kind of have this monthly view and single run view. And I'd like to kind of zoom in on why I would use the monthly view and then why I would use the single run view to analyze my data. So let's first start with the monthly view since that's the first tab here. So why is it advantageous to view the monthly view versus the single view?
Yeah, I like the monthly view a lot because obviously it's an aggregation of a lot of data points rather than just looking at one or a couple of them. So it's really powerful in terms of picking up like robust trends rather than maybe you're just feeling a little off or you're running on different terrain or what may it be on a single run. But the benefits of using the monthly view is it's very standardized. You can pick the pace. It's standardized for any condition that you're running in. And then basically you're able to see the metrics on the side of that as well, the metric distribution. So you can kind of see how those two correlate. It's also great for, comparing shoes with our shoe tagging feature. You can pick basically either the same month with the same shoe, or if you're looking at how you look at how the shoe's faring over time, you can kind of even get a sense for how the shoe's breaking down by the way that affects your form. Maybe when you wear that shoe in January versus when you wear that shoe in March, you see kind of that form breakdown for it because the shoe is breaking down. That's just one example. Another thing that we use with our pros a lot is just monitoring red flags for injury or coming back from injury. For example, we have our articles about Charlie Lawrence coming back from his injury, his tear in his Achilles, and we had that baseline footpath before, and just every month we're basically able to see his progress back to that healthy footpath. And this is also just like in terms of improvement, I think that this is the best way to see if those interventions that you're doing that we're going to talk about soon are actually making the differences that you want to make, because it is kind of that multiple aggregated data point.
So it seems to me that if I've been collecting a lot of data, I've been using Stryd for a few months, I've been running across a variety of speeds, I've been tagging my shoes. This is probably the view I should be looking at primarily when I'm analyzing my footpath, is this monthly view.
For sure. Yeah, that's definitely going to have the most power and the most, robust, basically correlates, takeaways for what you're looking for rather than a one-off or a couple of runs.
So there are some use cases where I might want to look at the single run view. Can you touch on those, on what are the advantages of kind of the single run view and kind of the more specific use cases I might want to be looking at this data?
Yeah, so I really love the single run view for one, looking at fatigue. So seeing how your form does under, say, like a race condition, like a half or a full marathon or a long run or a long workout, and seeing how your form breaks down over time. Because that's another dimension of this, right? Is how does my footpath look when I'm feeling good, but how does my footpath look when I'm getting tired? And what are those things that are going first? Oh, maybe my stance time's getting longer, and that's the first thing I see when my form starts to break down. So maybe that's the lowest hanging fruit for me to focus on, even though when I'm fresh, it looks good. So these are just ways to look at that. I also, again, like going back to the race case, I love comparing races using this as well. Again, I like using this with our pros for, say, Clayton, when I'm comparing Paris to Chicago to Boston. It's really great to have these data points and under, you know, different courses, but very similar physiological stress, and being able to pick out fatigue cues from that. Um, and yeah, I mean, the only caveat with this is making sure that you're comparing similar speeds to similar speeds and similar terrains to similar terrains. So just be careful with that. But if you have that under wraps, this signal run view can still be as equally as powerful as the monthly. Again, for those like longer sessions where you're looking at fatigue and those key races.
Awesome. I know one of my use cases, which I've talked about before, is I know I'm going to fatigue running uphill after, X number of miles. By using this single run view, I can determine the exact duration at which I begin to fatigue when running uphill. And that kind of allows me to target my hill workouts more specifically. For example, if I know I fatigue after 15 minutes of running uphill, I know I need to be doing 20, 25, 30-minute workouts, targeting that kind of uphill running, and that allows me to basically build up that skill and build that durability to running uphill. So we do also have that metric distribution chart in the monthly view. I know you touched on this briefly, but could you just hit on that again, on why this metric distribution chart can kind of help add that context to the monthly view?
Yeah, again, the footpath is basically multiple data points put together to create this basically tracking of your foot. Whereas these metrics on the side are specifically looking at specific parts of or quantifying specific parts of your footpath. And they can be reflected in different ways in the shape of the footpath, but it's not necessarily a specific part of it. So, for example, stance phase maps on where well to ground contact time, but they aren't necessarily the same thing. Ground contact time is the amount of time that you spend on the ground, and stance phase is the percentage of stride that you spend on the ground. Very similar, but not the same thing. Leg spring stiffness, for example, if your leg spring stiffness increases, you might see higher knee setting because you're hitting the ground more effectively. You're able to snap back the energy more. But again, I can't pinpoint a certain point on the footpath that is a leg spring stiffness point. So these things are kind of just synergistic to another. Like you can think of the metrics as kind of quantifying parts of the footpath, and the footpath is reflecting what's happening in your metrics. So we kind of have these two articles as ways, again, two ways for you to kind of look for improvement. What's the lowest hanging fruit? And then also figure out practical ways, whether it is through more focusing on that metric way or focusing on the footpath, whatever makes most sense for you. But they do work together in tandem.
Awesome. So now I understand the components of the footpath. I understand my own data. Now let's put it all together here and look at how this data converts and translates to using this article and understanding if characteristics are more successful versus less successful. So I've grabbed one of the images here we have from the article. Ko, could you kind of talk us through what we're looking at specifically in this view and what characteristics have been more successful in kind of these solid lines versus the dash lines?
Yeah, so this is one of the athletes we work with, but they had an injury and they're coming back from the injury, and I was basically using monthly view to keep track of this. But basically, the dash is going to be the injury, the start of the injury, and then the solid's going to be a couple months after. And basically, what we're seeing here is, as pointed out by the arrows, is that basically he's getting increased symmetry between the two sides. If you can kind of look, the dashed line on that right foot, or sorry, on that left orange foot is really like kind of tilted down. And that's the side that he was affected on. That was the side that the injury was on. And you can see as you look towards the solid orange line, it shifts back up and it becomes more symmetrical with the blue right leg. And that just shows like his injury progression over time in terms of that symmetry, and he's not compensating anymore. You also see an increased quicker heel recovery and a higher knee setting as well. Like you can see that the lines, basically the hump of that footpath in the back is higher, and you can see that the line coming down, although it might be steeper because that knee lift is higher, it's coming down harder, and you gain more effective force application there. And this, basically results in a longer footpath and shorter stance phase. And basically, like a good thing to keep in mind, and the good thing that this points out is that basically moving in the right direction in terms of efficiency and injury resilience for your footpath. Similarly to metrics, it's not you work on one thing and that one thing gets better. If you work on one thing, there's a lot of things that can also improve at the same time. Oh, you improve your knee setting. Oh, I'm actually getting a shorter stance phase as well because I'm able to load and hit the ground effectively and use that force effectively now. So these things are kind of, exponential in their improvement. It's just, picking the lowest hanging fruit, like I like to say, for yourself, and what makes most sense for you to work on. And working on from like an exercise down standpoint rather than I want to work on this specific part of my footpath. So I'm going to try and bring my heel up quicker or whatever it may be, because usually that will lead to non-desirable outcomes rather than just focusing on exercise-based improvement.
We also included this second screenshot in the article, and this is from the rear perspective. Kind of imagine if someone was running on a treadmill and you're standing behind them and looking at the path of their foot. And although our footpath article focused primarily on the side perspective, it looks like we can kind of see these same evident patterns in the rear view. Can you explain that a level deeper here on, are these patterns both evident in the side view and the top view and the rear view?
Yeah, I really advocate for looking at your footpath and getting familiar with it in all perspectives, because each perspective can kind of highlight things a little bit more clearly. Like, for example, for an efficient and a quick heel recovery, this is a good example of it. From the side, we could see that he was pulling it up higher, and with that higher knee setting, he was getting his footpath a little higher before it went down. But in this case, we're also seeing that he's actually getting less excess lateral movement in terms of he has less wasted movement to the side, and he's becoming more symmetrical underneath his body. So I wouldn't have known that unless we looked at this back view. So it just gives another perspective and another point at which to look at. And it helps you to see symmetry a little bit more holistically rather than just from one view.
All right. So, kind of the final step here, and this is included in the article a bit, is now implementing changes to improve the Stryd footpath here. So, I pull up one example here. Shorter stance phase is typically more advantageous. So, okay, can you walk through the interventions here? It looks like this is a combination of kind of cues, drills, and then just kind of holistically thinking about the footpath. Can you kind of describe what these interventions are and how to implement these in the routine?
Yeah, so kind of like I said, the best way to implement change or improvement in your footpath is to do more exercise-based view of it rather than I want to like trying to bring my foot up off the ground quicker for a shorter stance phase. So the best way to do this for a shorter stance phase is to focus on that power. and basically improving the power will decrease stance time because you're effectively loading and deloading that Achilles structure, that leg mass complex. So this is going to be plyometrics, which is basically like pogos, bouncing up and down quickly, box jumps, things like that. And then isotonic hold. So that's when basically the muscle's not shortening or lengthening, it's staying the same. So for example, you could do a single leg press where you have enough weight on it that the leg press is actually not moving, but you're maximally pushing force on it. And that's actually stressing the muscle more than it would be when it's strengthening and shortening. So that's just an example for basically working on that power generation. And then on the drill side of it, there's drills like quick feet, basically that are working on that like neuromuscular activation, working on getting on and off the ground really quickly. And that'll convert over to that shorter stance phase.
So if I wanted some drill recommendations, is that something I can kind of head to our other article? And I'm going to pull that up here briefly because we do have some tremendous videos in there. But I think you talked about this earlier, but it's kind of like they kind of tie into each other. So could I implement some of these ground time drills and improve my stance phase?
For sure. Again, we, it's something that we want to work on going forward is kind of linking these two things together better for people so they can easily make that connection between the two. But for example, that shorter stance phase and that ground contact time or duty factor are really closely linked. So, using the drills or the exercises for ground contact time will translate well to improving that stance phase in your footpath as well.
So now my big question is the final piece of this puzzle. So I understand my footpath, I understand what's better, I understand what I should be implementing, but how should I determine if this is working? Is this something I should be monitoring in the monthly view? Is this something, how long is it going to take to see changes? Kind of give me the answer to this. How can I determine if all this is really working, if I am improving?
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to the model that we put together in the metric article as well, which is basically a feedback loop. So, you're going to collect your data. You're going to identify what the lowest hanging fruit is, whether that be, stance phase or heel recovery or whatever you think might be the most glaring thing, or maybe it is a metric that you see actually more prominent than something in the footpath. And then basically you're going to implement exercises. So like those drills that we recommended on the metric article. And then you're going to do that, implement it over a month, 2 months. It really depends on the individual, how long it takes to see like radical improvements. Most likely you'll see small steps over time. And that's honestly probably better than huge jumps all at once because it gets your body used to it in a gradual manner. But basically you're going to implement those things over, let's say, a month, and then we'll go back and check in the monthly view. Is that metric improving? Is that part of my footpath improving? If not, okay, maybe we'll give it another month. Or maybe intuitively, I feel like these exercises aren't necessarily getting what I want to get at. And then that gives me the cue to try something different. We're all about basically getting the most bang for your buck and using your time effectively. We don't want to just blindly follow a training plan or a strength training protocol that's not working. And basically Stryd gives you a really good way of checking to see if this is actually leading to the improvement that you want.
Awesome. We do have some questions. I'm going to be dropping these in the chat, and I'd like to pass these off to you, KO, here. So the first question we have is, are you planning to add some coach to it? Like, will it be analyzed? Will my running be analyzed and give me advice on what I should change or what I should improve? Thank you. So how would you kind of approach this? So right now we don't have an automated system, but if we really wanted to boil this down to the simplest terms, how would a runner simply analyze their data and start applying these concepts?
Yeah, again, I think these articles are like the main place to do that. We'll continue to, flush out our exercise portfolio so that people know, practical exercises and drills and range of motion to do for specifically what they want to work on. So continue to stay tuned for that. But for example, for your metrics, you want to look at that distribution and see where you fall in terms of what's the lowest hanging fruit. Is my impact loading rate really high compared to people like me? Okay, that's the thing I want to focus on. Okay, I'm going to look at the impact loading rate exercises, implement those, see how it changes. Same thing for footpath. If there's something glaring in the footpath that you're seeing, say, I don't know, again, like shorter stance phase, then I'm going to look at that. Okay, look at maybe the ground contact drills and exercises, implement that, and see how it changes. And that's the best practical way I can recommend for working on these things in the meantime as we continue to build out this practical application part.
So we do have a comment from Ryan that says, really glad to see this, great info, and it ties the footpath analysis to training interventions, which is really needed for this feature. We have a question asking from Jonathan saying, what are your plans for incorporating Power Center and footpath tools into the Stryd app? The mobile site is functional, but more challenging to use on smaller screens. So this is a great question, Jonathan. And really, we're taking a stepwise process to this where we've introduced on Power Center because we do have that more screen real estate. Now we're introducing kind of these the knowledge and interventions you should be taking. So we're going to continue to have improvements here. Our plans will be kind of informed by your feedback. So as the Stryd user base does use this feature, share your feedback in the Stryd community, share the improvements you're seeing, the kind of drills you're implementing, and that'll kind of help us guide us on the main use cases of these features, which will really help us develop moving forward. So of course, our plans are to develop the feature that's needed most for you. All right, so we have another question here that's kind of in the same spirit as the first question, saying, is there a service that's offered to review your footpath and make suggestions? And Ko, I know we were having a conversation, just yesterday on possibly opening up a mailbag on where Stryd users can submit their footpath. What kind of advice can we offer as part of a mailbag to help users out?
Yeah, I mean, again, a mailbag's not gonna get to everyone, because it's gonna be only like certain people get randomly drawn to get analyzed, basically. But it'd basically be a way that we'd get a more detailed look at your footpath and also give others a better idea of practically how did they do this on their own. Again, this is something that will continue to get better in terms of being more streamlined and easy for people to just have recommendations put their way. But in the meantime, just continue to keep learning because this education and this knowledge is evergreen, regardless of whether we're going to get to that point where it is more automated in terms of analysis. But being able to understand that analysis and why it's giving you that and how to improve is going to be super helpful regardless of getting that information right away or not.
Yeah, so stay tuned for a mailbag. We might have some news on that soon, and we'll help you analyze that data, hopefully, whether it's via support or whether it's via the live stream. Just a few more positive comments here. This is a great article, helps a lot with understanding. Thanks for putting that together. And we have another comment saying, this is perfect. When I compare my trace to the doc, I think I've got an overall trace. So we're glad everyone's enjoying. That's what we're hoping for. And this is just the beginning of this revolutionary breakthrough feature. All right, so if you are running with the next-gen Stryd or Stryd Duo and you do want to start analyzing your Stryd Footpath, upgrade to the Stryd membership. Just upgrading for a single month, that'll give you a good view into all of your historical data. So you've been building up data, you've been syncing your footpath, but you haven't taken a look yet. I would recommend just subscribing for a month, you'll get a lot of good insights just even through a 1 month kind of training cycle using this data. If you want information on future live streams and future feature releases, go to the Stryd YouTube channel and subscribe and turn on notifications. When you turn notifications, you can be notified when we go live. So just by tapping on that button, whether you're on mobile or on the desktop, you can flip those notifications on and stay up to date on all things related to Stryd. That is all we have for today. Ko, do you have any final words for the Stryd community and their Stryd Footpath data?
No, not really. I mean, take the article in chunks. It's a lot of information. But again, I do really think it's evergreen in terms of being able to use that power to understand yourself and how to improve. And again, this is all about, again, getting the most bang for your buck and making sure you're actually doing things that are helping you, run longer, run faster, and enjoy yourself. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And that's what we're here for. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ko, for this article and for joining us today. And thanks to the Stryd community for tuning in. We'll see you next time.